Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a big one. The drugs that essentially hit the brakes on the body's fight or flight response. We're going to make sense of adrenergic antagonists.
That's the plan. These are also known as sympatholytic drugs, and our mission today is really to get to the heart of how they work. It all comes down to something called adrenergic receptor-site specificity.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Let's break that down for everyone right at the start. What are we actually talking about when we say specificity?
It sounds complex, but it's actually the key. So, sympatholytic just means it blocks the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. But specificity is about the drug's aim.
Like, is it a sniper or a shotgun?
Exactly. Does it have an affinity for only alpha receptors or only beta receptors? And even then, is it just alpha 1 or beta 1? The more specific the drug, the more targeted its effects, and theoretically, the fewer side effects.
So how do they actually block those sites? Are they just, getting in the way?
That's a perfect way to think about it. It's competitive blocking. Imagine a parking spot. That's the receptor. Norepinephrine is the car that wants to park there to rev up the system. These drugs are like smaller, faster cars that zip in and occupy those alpha and beta receptor sites first. If the natural neurotransmitter can't bind, it can't activate, and that blockage gives us the clinical effects we want. Lower blood pressure, a slower pulse.
So they're squatters. I like that. But you mentioned a really important point that this specificity, this targeted aim, isn't always perfect.
No, it's not. And this is critical. A drug might be selective for, say, beta-1 receptors,
Yeah.
but if the drug level in the blood gets too high, maybe the dose is too big or the patient's kidneys aren't clearing it well.
Selectivity is lost.
Selectivity is lost. It starts blocking all the related receptors, and that's where you can get into trouble.
That makes a lot of sense. So before we get into the different drug categories, let's talk about the people taking them. The source material is really clear that age changes the game completely.
It absolutely does. Let's start with children. For them, there's a much greater risk for really serious complications. We're talking severe bradycardia, difficulty breathing, and some pretty dangerous swings in their blood sugar.
So precision is everything.
Everything. Doses have to be calculated to the microgram based on body weight or age. And the gold standard really is to have a second person, another nurse, double check your math before you give the dose. It's all about preventing toxicity.
And what about for adults? Is there a big safety alert that jumps out?
Oh, absolutely. It's for patients with diabetes. You have to re-educate them because this class of drug completely masks the body's warning signs.
No, so.
Well, normally if your blood sugar drops too low, you feel it, right? You get sweaty, your heart starts racing.
Okay.
Those are SNS responses.
Alarm bells.
Exactly. Adrenergic blockers turn those alarms off. A patient could be in a state of severe hypoglycemia and feel totally fine, which can be incredibly dangerous. We see a similar need for close monitoring in patients with severe thyroid disease, too.
And then we get to older adults. It seems like the risks just multiply.
They do. Older adults are just more prone to all the adverse effects, CNS, cardiovascular, GI, you name it. It's often because of some level of renal or hepatic impairment, meaning the drug hangs around in their system longer.
So the usual mantra applies.
Start low and go slow, absolutely, and you monitor them very, very closely. It is worth mentioning that bisoprolol is often a go-to choice for hypertension in this group, just because it tends to have a better side effect profile.
Something else that stood out was the warning about herbal remedies. Things people might not even think to mention.
Yes, and it's a huge potential problem. Things like ginseng or sage can actually amplify the hypotensive effects of these drugs.
So their blood pressure could just bottom out.
Precisely. And on the other side, you have things like fenugreek or celery, which can lower blood glucose. Now, you combine that with a drug that already masks the signs of hypoglycemia.
And you're walking into a potential crisis.
You really are. You have to ask about everything.
Okay, let's dive into the pharmacology. Category 1, the non-selective adrenergic blocking agents. These are the ones hitting both alpha and beta receptors, right?
Right. These are your heavy hitters like labetalol, imidazole, and carvedilol. They block both, so their action is powerful. They lower blood pressure, slow the pulse, and can even improve kidney perfusion by lowering renin levels.
Let's use the prototype, labetalol. What's the main clinical advantage of hitting both alpha and beta sites at the same time?
The big win with labetalol is that it lowers blood pressure without causing what we call reflex tachycardia.
Okay, explain that.
Normally, if your blood pressure drops suddenly, your body's reflex is to speed up the heart to compensate. But because labetalol is also blocking the beta receptors in the heart, it prevents that compensatory spike in heart rate. It makes the whole process smoother and safer.
That's a pretty clever mechanism. But if it's blocking so much, what are the absolute must-know contraindications?
Well, you have to think about what happens when you can't compensate. So anyone with existing bradycardia or a heart block is a no-go. The drug will just make it worse. And crucially, anyone with asthma or COPD,
Why is that one so critical?
because you lose the beta-2 effect, which is what allows your airways to open up bronchodilation. If an asthma patient has an attack while on this drug, their lungs can't respond. It's also contraindicated in shock, severe heart failure, and during lactation.
So the adverse effects are basically a picture of what happens when the sympathetic nervous system goes offline.
That's it exactly. In the CNS, you see dizziness, fatigue. Cardiovascularly, you can get too much hypotension or even worsening heart failure. And then the respiratory issues, bronchospasm, cough all from losing that sympathetic stimulation.
We have to stop here and emphasize what might be the single most important safety concept for this whole class of drugs. I'm talking about the danger of stopping them suddenly.
Yes, this cannot be overstated. If you take these drugs long-term, your body's adrenergic receptors, those parking spots we talked about, they become hypersensitive, they're starved for stimulation.
So they're just waiting for a signal.
They're primed. If you suddenly stop the drug, the body's own natural catecholamines from just a little stress or excitement can cause a massive, overwhelming response.
Leading to?
A heart attack, a stroke, life-threatening arrhythmias. This is why the drug must always be tapered down slowly, usually over 2 weeks, no exceptions.
So if a patient comes in and says, oh, I stopped my beta blocker yesterday, what's the first thing you do?
You get a bedside ECG stat. You need to assess their cardiac rhythm immediately and monitor their BP like a hawk. It's a potential cardiac emergency.
Got it. Okay, let's move to our second category, the alpha-adrenergic blockers. We'll start with the non-selective type.
Right, and the prototype here is phentolamine. It blocks the postsynaptic alpha-1 receptors, which gives you vasodilation. But, and this is a big but it also blocks the presynaptic alpha-2 sites.
And why does blocking that presynaptic alpha-2 site matter so much?
Because that alpha-2 site is the brake pedal. It's a feedback loop that tells the nerve to stop releasing norepinephrine. When you block it, more norepinephrine gets released, and you end up with that reflex tachycardia we talked about.
Which sounds like something you'd want to avoid. So where is phentolamine actually used?
Its main use is very specific and very important. It's used to prevent tissue death after an IV infiltration of a potent vasoconstrictor, like norepinephrine or dopamine.
So if the IV leaks?
If the IV leaks, those drugs cause such intense vasoconstriction in the surrounding tissue that it can die. You inject phentolamine directly into that area to force vasodilation and save the tissue. It's a rescue drug.
Wow, that's a great example of a niche but life-saving use.
Now, that brings us to the more common alpha blockers, the alpha-1 selective agents like doxazosin.
Yes, and this is the aha moment for selectivity. Doxazosin only blocks the postsynaptic alpha-1 receptors.
So it leaves that feedback loop, that brake pedal, alone. It leaves it intact, so you get the desired vasodilation and lower blood pressure, but you don't get the problematic reflex tachycardia. It's a much cleaner effect.
And doxazosin has another major indication besides hypertension, right?
It does. It's also a first-line treatment for benign prostatic hyperplasia, or BPH. The smooth muscle in the prostate and bladder neck is full of alpha-1 receptors. Blocking them relaxes that muscle and dramatically improves urine flow.
Okay, let's get to our final big category, the beta blockers. Everybody's heard of these. Let's start with the classic non-selective prototype, propranolol.
Right. Propranolol was a cornerstone drug for years. It blocks both beta-1 receptors in the heart and beta-2 receptors, which are mostly in the lungs. That beta-1 block is great. It lowers heart rate, contractility, and workload. Fantastic for hypertension, angina, even migraines.
But the source material gives us that really potent case study of MR, the computer programmer, to show the dark side of that beta-2 blockade.
It's a perfect tragic example. MR was on propranolol for a tremor. He had mild allergies. When he was exposed to pollen, his airways started to constrict,
which would normally trigger a sympathetic response.
Yes, the beta-2 receptors should have kicked in and caused bronchodilation to open things up. But propranolol was blocking them. He lost his natural rescue mechanism, and it led to respiratory arrest.
It's a chilling example, so the contraindications are crystal clear. Asthma, COPD, anything that compromises the lungs.
Absolutely. And another key point with propranolol is that it readily crosses the blood-brain barrier, which leads to more CNS side effects. Nightmares, depression, fatigue.
Which leads us perfectly to the modern solution. The beta-1 selective agents, with atenolol as our prototype. What is the single biggest advantage here?
It's all about preserving respiratory function. At normal therapeutic doses, these drugs focus their block on the beta-1 receptors in the heart. They mostly leave the beta-2 receptors in the lungs alone.
So you get the cardiac benefits.
You get the great cardiac benefits, lower heart rate, lower BP, but the patient keeps that critical ability to bronchodilate if they need to.
Making it the go-to for patients who smoke or have asthma or COPD.
Exactly. You avoid that huge respiratory risk. And atenolol, unlike propranolol, doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier as easily, so you tend to see fewer of those troubling CNS side effects.
Okay, that was a massive amount of information. To pull it all together, let's synthesize the absolute core nursing considerations that apply to all of these adrenergic blockers.
Okay, first, assessment is key. You need a solid baseline of their cardiovascular status before you even think about the first dose BP, heart rate, rhythm, auscultate their lungs. And for any patient with diabetes, you have to be obsessive about monitoring their blood glucose because the warning signs are gone.
And when it comes to implementation, what's that one rule again?
I'll say it again because it's that important. Do not stop these drugs abruptly. They must be tapered slowly over about 2 weeks to prevent that rebound effect, the risk of heart attack or stroke.
And final teaching points for the patient going home.
Teach them to check their own pulse daily and to call if it's below 60. Remind them to change positions slowly to avoid dizziness from orthostatic hypotension. Report any signs of heart failure like sudden weight gain or swelling. And so important, tell them to avoid over-the-counter cold and allergy meds without clearing it with their provider first.
What a journey. We've covered the dual-action labetalol, the very specific use of phentolamine for extravasation, the BPH-friendly doxazosin, and that crucial split between the risky non-selective propranolol and the much safer selective atenolol.
And I think the final takeaway is really about a therapeutic trade-off. With these drugs, you gain incredible control over the cardiovascular system, but the price you pay is the loss of the body's own protective sympathetic reflexes, the ability to open your airways, the warning signs of low blood sugar. Managing that trade-off is everything.
So I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've established that selective beta blockers are so much safer for patients with lung issues. But we also know that selectivity disappears at high drug concentrations. So, in the real world, with imperfect patient compliance and variable metabolism, how truly safe are we? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.